हेलो एवरीवन, गुड आफ्टरनून, गुड इवनिंग ऑल। कैसे हैं सब लोग? मेरा नाम है अरविंद और हम इस बार लाए हैं एक नया चैनल नए नए लोगों के साथ यहाँ पे। द होल इंटेंट इज वी वांटेड टू टॉक लिटिल बिट मोर अबाउट other things outside cricket as well, whatever is happening in world, in India, from our perspectives, as a common man, as a common NRIs, and as our common Indian citizens. And so this is our attempt in doing that. तो मैं अपने बारे में थोड़ा एक quick introduction देना चाहता हूँ कि मैं कौन हूँ और मैं इसके बारे में कैसे क्यों क्यों बोल सकता हूँ और कैसे बोल पा रहा हूँ. So a little bit about me. My name is Arvind. मैं यूएस में रहता हूँ. I'm based here. I'm working in corporate. तो डे जॉब है कॉर्पोरेट में, रिटेल सेगमेंट में. My passion outside office has always been reading current events, reading news, reading international affairs, politics, political news. And so मुझे हमेशा लगा था कि we needed an outlet to share our views. And so this is our first attempt where we felt that we could do it. And I have two amazing gentlemen with me here, who's going to also share the same interest with me. Outside my office, I've always been traveled almost like 30 40 countries, lived in five six nations. So मुझे वो एक अलग पर्सपेक्टिव पता है जो इंडिया में रह के मुझे पता चला और जो मुझे बाहर रह के पता चला. मैं यूरोप में रहा हूँ, मैं यूएस में रहा हूँ और मैं एशिया में रहा हूँ. तो मुझे वो एक अलग सोच का मुझे idea आया है. So I felt it's a good way for me to engage that and talk about that. So let me just introduce our group here today. Who will be we'll go with this journey. I'll pass over to our regular from our Hyderabad Boys Cricket channel, Saurav.
Hello everyone. Harvind, thanks for passing on and giving a great introduction. So I mean हम लोग ने क्रिकेट के बारे में काफी बात की है पहले. I think this is going to be a new channel or something similar to you. I think I work in the corporate as well. लेकिन मैं इंडिया में काम कर रहा हूँ. You're working in US, so I'm possibly working as a coolie, but you are not.
We're all coolies.
So right. So yeah, I mean, काफी time से something similar to Arvind. I mean, current affairs, international news, what's happening in Indian politics, and it has kind of gone beyond since the last 4-5 years to international politics as well. तो काफी interest रहा है. I think एक reason था इस channel का खोलने का. I think we've been deliberating a lot since few months actually कि क्यों करना चाहिए. I think one of the things that we basically saw was there's this void that we basically felt where a common citizen can come to a social platform and express certain things that possibly is happening around. इंडिया में क्या हो रहा है, क्योंकि इंडिया में क्या हो रहा है, बाहर क्या हो रहा है, आपने ज्यादातर सुना होगा कि ये मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया चैनल्स क्या सोच रहे हैं. सो उनके अपने बायसेस हो सकते हैं. आई मीन मैं ये बोलने की कोशिश नहीं कर रहा हूँ कि हमारे व्यूज बाद में जाके बायस या अनबायस नहीं हो, लेकिन मेरे हिसाब से वी विल ट्राई टू मेक श्योर कि हमारे व्यूज थोड़े बैलेंस्ड हो. सो दैट्स वन थिंग दैट वी हैड इन आवर माइंड. और I mean, apart from that, एक और था कि हम लोग क्रिकेट के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. That's one thing. So the other thing that we had basically in our mind was let's also share certain views that we have with respect to politics and rest of things. So I thought this would be the right time to start talking about it. Yeah.
So glad to be part of this. Moving on to our new entry into our group, जो क्रिकेट में नहीं थे बट इसमें बहुत इंटरेस्ट से आना चाहते थे. Passing it over to Anant.
Hello everybody. This is the first time I'm doing a podcast, so I wouldn't say I'm nervous, but there's still a lot of learning required. So my name is Anant. I'm currently a researcher in economics in Norway. So I've been living outside India for close to about 17 years now. And during this period, I've lived in quite a few countries. The last ones being UK and quite a bit of time in Belgium, which is close to France. I wouldn't say my Hindi is as strong as these other two guys. So I'll try to restrict myself in English, but keep it to a minimum as far as Hindi is concerned. So what are my interests? Well, obviously, traveling is a big part of who I am today. Apart from this, I have a deep interest in any economics related topics, especially especially happening things like cryptocurrencies and anything that has to do with banking and capital markets in general. इसके अलावा, I also tend to focus a lot on politics and international relations. So I tend to study all of them a lot and try to map the interconnections between all of them, because again, as an economist, I strongly believe that nothing is monocausal. So everything has multiple reasons attached to it. So this podcast is our attempt to deliver to you what we think is happening around the world. And we aim to do this on a regular basis, hopefully weekly, if not at least on a bi-weekly basis. And our objective is to cover all the events that are happening across the world, and especially in India, and offer a very unbiased perspective. So we are not trying to be right-wing or left-wing. We will take a stand based on what the facts tell us. And that's going to be the foundation of this podcast. We will supplement whatever we say with data, with theory, and we will try to provide as much information as possible in the most unbiased manner. So yeah, let's get started. So what's today's topic, Arvind? Saurav?
Yeah, so Anant, बहुत सही तरीके से आपने बताया कि we are not going to be biased तो होते हैं, but we'll try to be as balanced as we can. एक अच्छी बात अनंत को जो मैं लोगों को बताना चाहता हूँ, अनंत is one of the few people in the world I know who has traveled 100 countries. तो इनका एक सोच है, वो unparalleled है in terms of experiences which he has gathered over the last 17 years, जो उन्होंने बोला है कि बाहर से रहे हैं. और एक और बात आपको ये पॉडकास्ट से मिलेगा कि एक अलग पर्सपेक्टिव of people who are in corporate India but are well traveled. Between us 3 years, we have lived in 10 countries, have traveled to more than if you can say 100 plus countries. Saurav has done a lot of Asia and Southeast Asia and now Europe. तो हमारे पर्सपेक्टिव्स, हम इंडिया में रहते हैं, हम यूएस में रहते हैं और हम यूरोप में रहते हैं, तो एक वो अलग पर्सपेक्टिव हम आपको देना चाहते हैं. एंड दैट इज व्हाई आई वांट यू गाइस टू लिसन टू अस, बिकॉज ये आपको मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया में नहीं मिलेगा, which is going to be a very tunneled vision view of it. So with that in mind, I wanted to call out our first topic we wanted to talk, which is happening in the news over the last 4-5 days, or jo kafi, it's also not being shared in some parts of the news. It's in Twitter, I felt, but it's not across the mainstream media. But I thought it needs a little bit more attention than it is getting what it is happening today, and that is the riots which is happening in France now. What really happened? And I thought I'd give a quick introduction, and I'll give the message to Anant here to share a little bit more details, considering he's living in Europe and has been through some of these journeys, living in Belgium previously. तो लोगों को ये बता सकते हैं कि 27 जून को, तो 5 दिन पहले, I think around like evening के time पे, 2 officers I think saw some car. I don't know. I think it was like a sports car or something. From what I know, and Anant, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it has got like a polished registration plate. तो उन्होंने उनको रोकने की कोशिश करी. ड्राइवर था वो 17 साल का. ही इज अ डिलीवरी ड्राइवर. उनका नाम था नाहिल मिर्जूक. ही इज एन अल्जीरियन origin person living in the suburb of Paris.
France. Paris, yeah.
Paris, yeah. I think Nanterre. तो उनको उन्होंने he was about to drive away, and essentially officer fired back at him, because वहां पे एक law था, if someone is stopped or someone's getting away from the police, the police has the firearm law जो बोलते हैं. Passenger Marzouk को लगी, the driver को लगी, the passengers वहां से निकल गए थे, I believe, and then Marzouk, the Nahil, the person, he passed away even though they tried to resuscitate him. तो ये 27 जून को हुआ था. उसके बाद जो हुआ, which has been unprecedented in France. I mean, okay, 17 साल 18 साल पहले 2005 में riots हुए थे, but it has been unprecedented since that. there has been a civil unrest, there has been riots, there has been attacks, not just on the police, but also on the property. And essentially France एक rioting city बन गया है. पेरिस को ऐसा लगा, हम लोग ट्विटर में देख रहे थे कि बकमूद लग रहा था. That was like other means कि is this Bakhmut or is it Paris? And shocking part was it's spread across so quickly across different parts of the city, France. So not just in Paris or suburbs, other cities like Marseille and a lot of other places also में ये हुआ. और अब ये बढ़ रहा है. और वेस्टर्न मीडिया में इनकी कवरेज थोड़ी कम लग रही है. आई डोंट सी दिस एज अ फ्रंट पेज न्यूज हेडलाइन इन न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स, एंड आई डोंट सी दिस फ्रंट पेज न्यूज एनीवेयर एल्स. एंड आई नो इंडिया में भी लोग ट्विटर में बात कर रहे हैं, न्यूज में बात कर रहे हैं. बट बिफोर वी गेट टू ऑल दैट, आई रियली वांटेड टू अंडरस्टैंड फ्रॉम अनंत की व्हाट्स द व्यू फ्रॉम यूरोप. क्या हुआ, आप क्या बता सकते हैं कि व्हाट्स बीन योर पर्सपेक्टिव एंड व्हाट्स रियली हैपनिंग एंड व्हाट्स नेक्स्ट?
Yeah, so the thing is, I lived in a city called Ghent, which is 30 minutes away from Brussels. So I lived in the Flemish part, whereas Brussels is predominantly French speaking. So if agar aap Brussels pe jaoge, right? So you will see that there is a predominant Muslim population in that city. And you and I, Arvind, we have traveled in Paris. Saurav, I guess you have been there too.
I've been there very recently. Yeah.
Yes. So if you have been visiting France, especially Paris, you will notice the moment you go on these metro trains or move in buses or just go to any place, you will see that there is a big expatriate population. Expatriate in the sense people who are of African or Middle Eastern descent and who are living in France as citizens or as permanent residents. So I just want to give you a brief idea of why there is so much immigration in France. So maybe I can share my screen. So just bear with me a second. So I just want to give you a glimpse of, can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the world map of French colonialism. So what do you see here? Here you have France, and alongside you have the former colonies occupied by France. Until I think the mid-1960s. If I remember correctly, Algeria was one of the last colonies to get liberated or get independence. So you see a big chunk of North and West Africa that was controlled by France under colonialism. Obviously, the French also controlled a big chunk of North America, but these parts got independent way before, and became parts of contemporary United States and Canada. At the same time, there's also a big chunk here comprising modern day Lebanon and Syria, which are also predominantly French speaking to this day. So agar aap visa apply karoge to Lebanon, you will have to fill out a form that is written in French. So it's more or less the lingua franca or the common everyday language that people tend to use in these parts of the world. If you have traveled in North Africa or Western Africa, excluding things places like Nigeria and a few countries like Liberia, France is the main language spoken officially. There are also some parts in Indochina, like Vietnam and parts of Cambodia, which are also French speaking, which were under French domination, but since then they moved on to under Dutch occupation. So there are not many people who speak French here. Lastly, there's also Madagascar. Again, Madagascar is one of the most poorest countries. There's not a lot of population, and usually Madagascar doesn't occupy front news on the global at the global level. So our focus here is on these two big parts.
And then you have those French islands, which obviously are not part of discussion,
yes. But again,
it's a big empire, like British.
Absolutely. Yes, and most of those French islands are still controlled by France. So people living in all these French islands, in these French controlled islands, are designated as French citizens. Okay, but what's unique here? All these countries in the Middle East and in Africa that are in dark blue, these countries received independence starting from the 1940s all the way up to the late 1960s, and after that, what has happened is France has followed a very liberal very liberal immigration policy. Now, you might ask why that is the case. This is predominantly because of shortages in manpower, especially in blue collar jobs. So they needed people to come and work as plumbers, as laborers in mines and whatnot. And for that, getting people from these former colonies was a very cheap option.
Or
And people in these
and they all spoke same language. सबको वही French आती है तो आसान है.
Absolutely.
Take them to France. Same भाषा बोलेंगे.
Absolutely.
Integrate हो जाना है तो हो जाएंगे. काम कर लेंगे.
Absolutely. And obviously, there's again, like I said, nothing is monocausal. There were a number of other political, economic factors that were at play here. Most of these former colonies were impoverished. Many of them continued to be impoverished, and that there was a natural drive incentive amongst people living here to move to France in search of better economic opportunities. All right, and the same happened in the Middle East, especially in Lebanon. So there's a big Lebanon expatriate population living in France, especially in Paris.
तो दर्शकों को वही बता दें कि जैसे हमारे इंडिया में होता था कि हमने इंग्लिश सीखा और अंग्रेज कॉलोनियल एम्पायर में थे और हमें था कि यूएस जाए, यूके जाए, गो बैक टू आवर कॉलोनियल दिस थिंग. इट्स अ वेरी सिमिलर मैकेनिज्म कि वो फ्रेंच कॉलोनियल पावर में थे तो आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस क्या था कि सीकिंग बेटर अपॉर्चुनिटीज गो टू फ्रांस एंड this thing.
Yes.
Sorry, Anand.
Yes.
I wanted to give context.
That's all right. So what happened? So people moved in droves to France from these former colonies. And if you draw parallels to another big country in Europe where a similar thing has happened, you can take the case of Germany. So Germany has a huge Turkish population. Of course, now Germany didn't occupy Turkey at any point in time, but due to liberal immigration policies, there is a big Turkish population living in Germany, and many of them are German citizens today. So many people came for economic benefits, for getting, for the benefits that a French or a German citizenship would have provided. But alongside, what has happened is France, just like other European countries, has followed a very liberal immigration policy towards these former colonies, meaning if one guy goes and gets a job in France, then he or she tries to, mostly they try to bring in all of their family members, their parents, their wife, their kids, and after that they try to bring their brothers, their sisters, and their families. So what has happened is there has been mass rapid immigration between the two, between these former colonies to France. Now, at the outside, it all seems fine. I mean, people, you can argue as an economist that, the more people arrive, the more they'll seek jobs and, they'll provide labor, they'll earn wages, they'll contribute to the GDP and whatnot. But that is exactly not what has happened. And now, I'm not trying to blame either side, but what you see is during the course of this immigration, since, let's say, the 1970s, at least two things have happened. One is that there was this belief amongst French politicians that people who immigrate from these former colonies, because they speak French, because they really want jobs, they also assumed mistakenly that these immigrants would integrate into French society, meaning they would adopt French customs, they would understand, they would be okay with French culture, and they would probably assimilate themselves into French traditions and customs. Now, if you look back, this has definitely not happened. A majority of people from these countries are Muslim, and they have tended to stick to their religion, which again is not a problem in its own sense. But what has happened is this has prevented them from embracing French culture fully. So the best example is, this whole debate about halal versus other types of meat. So you and I mean, when we go to a French restaurant, we don't ask this question. When we travel there, we just eat what is given. Now, again, whether you're a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian, that again depends on your preferences and tastes, but you don't generally ask this as an Indian traveling abroad or as a Hindu or a Christian traveling to France. But often not, you will hear Muslims asking this very specific question. And then, if it's not halal, they will not touch that food. So this is just a small example of how integration hasn't really worked in Europe. So these people come in search of better economic opportunities, and don't forget, many of these countries are embroiled in civil wars from time to time. There are coups constantly taking place here. So many of these people are actually trying to escape violence towards regions offering better safety. So where to go rather than your former colony, which is stable, which is a thriving democracy, offers the best opportunities for you to save your life and that of your family. So this has happened. So what you're seeing today is the culmination of 3 or 4 decades of non-integration. And non-integration has happened due to faults from both sides, from the side of the French government as well as from the side of the immigrants. So the immigrants, they want to move to a country just for economic opportunities, but they don't want to embrace that culture. They don't marry local people. They shun the local traditions. Um, they don't want to adopt local customs. And what this has resulted is this thing called ghettoization. So if you go to the outskirts of Paris, you will see these huge apartment blocks, which were mainly developed to provide affordable housing to many of these immigrants. These are no-go areas. I've been to some of them, and these are very scary areas. You find them almost outside in the suburbs of any major European capital today, whether that's Denmark, whether that's Copenhagen, or whether that's Brussels. Brussels has been in the news not so long ago for many of the terror attacks that took place. So there is this big area called Molenbeek, right outside the one of the main railway stations in Brussels, right? So these are I wouldn't say unsafe areas, but the moment you go there, you feel like you're not in Belgium anymore.
So आप कह रहे हो कि you go to these places which are within these European capitals or outside these European capitals, it doesn't feel Europe anymore. It feels more of Middle East Africa.
There has been segregation. That's what I'm trying to say. So you imagine you have an apartment block or a locality. Suddenly, there's increased. You start seeing more and more Middle Eastern people or African people. So these people tend to bring in their family members, their friends, and whatnot, and they start demanding more and more accommodation. Okay. Now, once you have, let's say, 100 people living from the same area, let's say 100 people living from Algeria. Now, naturally, you want a local your bakery to provide local Algerian food, right? Halal food, right? You want access to recreational services, recreational opportunities that you used to enjoy back in Algeria. Okay. Why does this happen? Because within the same area, there are 100 people. And you see this often with Indian communities outside as well. When people who go abroad for masters, they tend to move along only with Indians. They will only cook Indian food. They will not try anything that is local to even the US. So this has just happened in a more protracted fashion in France and in other European countries, wherever Muslims have tended to immigrate. Again, I'm not coloring a particular religion in that sense, but I'm just saying that the lack of assimilation has been more intense in the case of communities that belong to the Muslim religion.
तो आप वही कह रहे हो कि Muslims में integration थोड़ा कम हुआ है, इसलिए ये थोड़ा ज्यादा दिख रहा है as opposed to say other religions who may have done a little bit maybe a better assimilation or a little bit
at least
slightly a finer version of it. मैं ये नहीं कह रहा कि सब ऐसा ही कि तो इसलिए ये थोड़ा ज्यादा दिख रहा है as opposed to others.
Yeah. At least this is what you see in the data, and this is what you see from your day-to-day experiences.
Okay.
So when I go out, when I talk to a person from South Africa or from the US or somebody from India or Russia, for example, you have a typical conversation, but you're not getting any calls to convert. Whereas when you talk to a Muslim, especially those who have this, again, not everybody, they're very nice people to talk to generally, but sometimes you get this idea that the other person is trying to convert you to Islam out of the blue. So this sort of feels a bit forced, and this also shows the kind of mindset the person has, that they don't accept you for who you are, for what you believe in.
So basically, you are saying कि it's been happening for 4 decades, and it was bound to happen sometime, and it's happened now. The culmination of
Yes.
it.
And
Okay.
it has second order effects. So what happens? You see, let's say you have a locality where 100 French families were living. Okay, all white, all believing in a very liberal practices. Now, what happens? Increasingly, there's immigration into that area, and suddenly, in 10 years, these 100 families are replaced. 100 French families are replaced by 70 immigrant families. Okay, the whole set of businesses, the whole set of demographics, the whole set of jobs that are available in that area, everything changes alongside. Now, there's also a ripple effect, because suddenly, if you're trying to sell a house, imagine your French family is still living in that area. And this happens for better or worse. If you're trying to sell a house, and if there is a perception that your area is immigrant heavy, then you see that the prices in those areas are actually depressed.
Because
so what do you do? Yes. And if you anticipate this or start to see these effects, you will also tend to sell out and move to a more to an area where you feel more comfortable. Right? So what happens? Those 70 houses in 2 years, 3 years time, again, 70% immigrant population shifts to 80% or 90%, because only the immigrant families are willing to purchase homes or rent homes in that area. So isse kya hota hai? The demographics change tremendously in that area. Businesses close. Now, if 100 families are living there, and let's say you're selling pork in that area, okay, those 100 families will come up with sticks and say you cannot sell pork.
नहीं, आपने बहुत अच्छी बात कही, अनंत. And I want to bring in Saurav here to get his view. Saurav, आप अभी Paris गए थे. You were there. You just saw something. No, that was your first foray into Europe. India से आप गए थे, and आपने कुछ अलग देखा जो India नहीं है. Essentially, Paris अलग है. तो आपका क्या experience रहा, और आप क्या देख रहे हो इंडिया में इसका view? Because like India, Paris और France में एक similarity है कि Muslims, or in this case, we're singling them out because they are the ones who are in the news here. They are the second biggest majority. हम उन्हें minority नहीं कह सकते. 9% है वहाँ पे. India में I think it's what, 20% of the Muslims, 200. Yeah. So what is the take from your point of view, sort of, while Anand shares the screen, but sort of I'll call you in here and give what's happening from your side.
Yeah, so I think he's bringing up the numbers here. Yeah, it's 8%.
Yeah, it's 8%. It's actually 9% now. So, and also let me show you the evolution here. This is across Europe. It's about 3.8. It used to be about 3.8% around 2010. Abhi, look at the figures. It's massively increasing, right? And this is also bringing in a whole set of social issues. There's increased crime in cities and areas which see a huge amount of immigration from the Middle East and Africa. And this is a map of the extent of immigration, Muslim immigration in the EU and beyond. It's very high. And this is the expected. I mean, this is the expected demographic.
So, आप कह रहे हो कि almost 13% of the population would become Muslims.
Yes.
In France. And it's going to rise.
In France. And it's only going to rise because, again, if you think about fertility rates, right? The average French person, French family maybe has 2 kids, if I remember, on average, whereas it's a lot higher in immigrant families. So the divide, or the share of the immigrant population, or that used to be immigrant, let's say the naturalized citizenry, is just going to increase over time. Now, that is going to bring in a lot of challenges. Like I said, I just explained you giving those examples. It's going to change everything. Economics, the moment population rises, people are going to demand political representation. You see that happening in Canada with the so-called Khalistanis today.
Yeah, so let me just move to Saurav here. Saurav, आपने देखा अभी, you've been there, looking at the data what Anand has just made. What's been your reaction and perspective sitting in India, and how is India reacting to all of this?
I think just a point that I would want to add to what Anant has said. I think जब 1960s, I think to what I remember, I think Algeria को independence मिला था 1962 1963 में. I think that possibly was the last country of African Peninsula जहाँ पे फ्रांस का कंट्रोल था. तो उसके बाद you had the 1970s में ईरान का revolution, where you had the Wahhabism and Salafism, which came in the early 90s. I think उसका भी कहीं ना कहीं एक रोल है. I mean, you have the clash of cultures coming in, but apart from that, the subtle radicalization that is, and I see that I saw that on the very first account when I was in UK. I mean, as soon as I hit London, आपके face में होता है. There are certain things that you basically say that are on your face. Paris में भी था मैं. I think to be very honest, I think we had an offline conversation about Paris. I think possibly the city which kind of disappointed me the most, as far as a lot of things are concerned. And it is quite surprising. I think next year, I think Paris is a city जहाँ पे Olympics होने वाला है, and you see what is happening right now. And I think मैं उस टाइम पे जब गया था, तो उस टाइम पे भी थोड़ा सा unrest था. मैं जब गया था उससे पहले थोड़ा कर्ड्स का था. कर्ड्स का थोड़ा प्रॉब्लम चल रहा था. उसके बाद आई थिंक इट प्रॉब्लम चल रही थी समथिंग विद रिस्पेक्ट टू पेंशन अगर इफ आई एम राइट. तो उस समय भी थोड़ा सा अनरेस्ट था. And you can basically see, matlab, I think Anand just highlighted the point. You have a lot of blacks and a lot of North African population. तो वहां पे आपको दिख जाता है कि there is quite a divide, as far as the economic divide, if I might want to say, between the North Africans and I wouldn't say Arabs per se here, but people who have migrated from North Africa and maybe let's say some part of Turkey or other Muslim countries to French locals. So there is a divide, and unfortunately, जो भी आप बोलेंगे, मेरा जो होटल था, it was in the suburbs of Paris. I'm not able to recollect the name. It was in the suburbs of Paris, और वहाँ पे भी आपको एक दिखता है divide. There is a divide that's there to be seen. I think I think we also have to consider how much of जो मैंने जो point बोला, Wahhabism, radicalized or Salafism, Iran revolution which happened in 1970s has also played a role in Muslims not intermingling with the society. Because I think India में भी हल्की सी problem रही है, where we see basically Muslims basically walking around in packs, in their packs, in their respective packs. और ये मैंने UK में भी देखा, और ये मैंने काफी part of Europe में भी देखा. Coming back to
just to clarify, Wahhabism, Salafism are a product of Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They mainly evolved because of massive funding that Saudi Arabia gave to all these madrasas and other religious institutions. You see that all around the world.
Yeah, but now Saudi Arabia has changed its tune and it's going towards another segment.
Well, they have realized their folly, right?
Correct.
And
they
now
have realized it, but
MBS,
others haven't realized it.
Yeah, under MBS, they seem to be course correcting. But if you went in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s,
yeah, until before
they were on a completely different self-destructive trajectory.
So I want to talk about this particular aspect. Why is this one community being singled out? Hindus जाते हैं. Hindus are a big community in UK. Hindus are also, I'm not saying not a big community in France, but Indians have generally been one of the other community which has gone around. Business community ho ya tech community ho ya, in general we have always been adopted and moved around. But why is it that only Muslims or Islamic fundamentalism is being brought out in this, in a violent, what is the need of, ठीक है, माना गलती हुई, लोगों बच्चे को मारा, is justifying going and burning a library, right? Is going and burning those Carrefour stores and attacking those police stations and getting on the streets. Is that really the right way to saying कि आपने गलती की, so this is the way to do it? Why is it they are in the news for this?
But what do you do when, let's say, imagine you grow up in a ghetto all your life. You're a teenager. When you grow up in a ghetto, you're basically surrounded by kids with the same mentality. And what happens is, due to ghettoization, it's very difficult for social mobility to happen, right? It's very difficult to get jobs that are well paying. So most of these guys either work day jobs or they work in Carrefours or the supermarkets, right? Carrefour is a French supermarket brand. And so therefore, they find it very difficult to uplift themselves, either by education or by getting well-paying jobs. Now, both of these are interconnected in a big way, right?
Correct.
Now, iske alawa, what happens is, when you're growing up, you also need some motivation around you, whether that's your family, your friends, to actually study hard and uplift yourself. You generally don't find that in ghettoized societies. What happens? There's a lot of crime in that area. Again, because of lack of economic opportunities, nobody wants to hire people from that area, because again, the moment they hear that you're living in some arrondissement in France, which is known to be a ghetto, you don't want to hire that person. So एक तरह का social stigma हो जाता है over time. And we see that. I live in Norway. When we were looking to purchase a house, which is like 3 kilometers from our place, we were warned against buying there because it's a place where drug addicts tend to hang around. Now, trust me, Norway, अगर यहाँ पे बटुआ चोरी हो जाता है, तो it appears in the front page news. ठीक है? So you can imagine there's probably one drug addict sitting there, maybe once a week, and even that was causing a lot of concern amongst the rest of the population. So imagine here you have
exaggerated version.
Yes, and you could see that house prices are depressed in that area. That house is still on sale today.
Interesting. So the social element is there, which is causing them to go and resort to all of this mobility.
Absolutely.
France is not growing.
So what do these guys?
Per capita
that's a different thing. Again, see, that's a different thing. Even within that,
it's not a grown economy.
Stagnant society. Yeah, but it's decent. I mean, 2%, 1.5%. It's still okay.
These guys are not getting enough opportunities.
Yeah, there are enough jobs. I mean, there are enough well-paying jobs if you study hard. But if you have grown up in that environment where you basically have to fend for yourself, you live on welfare doled out by the state, more or less. There are a lot of families from these areas that are on welfare, right? Food stamps, basically. So what manifests as a result is these kids grow up in a very, very violent, very disenchanting environment, and that that causes them to burst out in so many different ways. So now when an event like this happens, you tend to do what your friends are doing, just to be part of the crowd. अगर एक बंदा जाके एक कार को जला देता है or sets a library on fire, you want to be part of that group. You know how group dynamics work. So you want to go and burn that library alongside or contribute to it. Whatever be the repercussions. Most of these kids have probably been to jail at least once, at least spent a night in a jail. So उनके लिए उनके लिए burning something and going to jail for a few days, that hardly matters. Or having something on having a criminal record hardly matters.
Wow. So and this is down to Saurav here. Now you're living in India. You see all of this, intolerance statements, media. इतना सब कुछ France में हम देख रहे हैं. What Anand is mentioning, the kind of environment they live in, the kind of violence they resort to, and yet we here in India, the news is, यार क्या intolerant देश है. Muslims are living as second-class citizens, like some Twitter thing like Rana Ayub and others. What do you have to say to that? I mean, this is the worst scenario you're seeing when you give upliftment or sort of scenario what's happening in France. I think India is in a much shade better with more number of Muslims. और हमें बोलते हैं कि intolerant country है. क्या है उसका आपका reaction or on this perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think we started with the podcast, right? I mean, इसका coverage बिल्कुल almost nil है. I mean, there's very little coverage of what's happening basically in France, and that's what basically is happening in India as well. I think there's very little coverage that you're getting from so-called leftists / liberal media, or liberal media personalities like Rana Ayubs and etc. I mean, और कौन है? रवीश है या फिर I don't know. I think थोड़ा time लगेगा. मुझे लगता है कि Arfa, मुझे लगता है 3-4 दिन या एक हफ्ते में you possibly would see something coming up in defense of these immigrants, for sure. I'm pretty sure of that. I think the blame possibly would be put on, let's say, the French government, or let's say the French locals, who possibly haven't done enough to make sure these immigrants feel home, if I may use that word, so that they could have assimilated with the society. So शायद that I think that work possibly is in progress. I think आपको एक हफ्ते में या एक हफ्ते 2 हफ्ते में वो वीडियो जरूर ध्रुव राठी, I think who is in the thick of things, वो जर्मनी में रहते हैं, if I'm right. तो वहाँ से तो जरूर आएगा.
He'll do a video.
लेकिन हाँ, it kind of talks about the total hypocrisy. I think India में तो, I think lately, there have been few Pakistanis. I think that's one thing, if someone can watch. There have been
Okay, Saurav,
his voice is breaking up.
Not Pakistanis.
Dude, let me.
Go on. So Saurav, your voice is breaking. Can you say again? I think maybe better now.
Yeah, go on.
Is it better now?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So there have been a lot of Pakistanis who've actually come to India lately in the last 2-3 months, and you basically have to hear their accounts of, and they've it's not that they've come here for 1 week or 2 weeks. Some of them have basically stayed here for 3 to 4 weeks. Like we are recording right now, there's one person of Pakistan origin who's come from Sweden, and you got to hear what he basically thinks about India and how Muslims are treated. तो मेरे हिसाब से तो इंडिया में, I think that you have your 1 or 2 sudden lynching episodes. I don't deny they do happen. I think certain things which possibly.
Are you talking of Professor Ishtiyaq Ahmed?
हाँ, Ishtiyaq Ahmed. Yeah. Recently वो आए हुए हैं. I think और एक महीने पहले 2 महीने पहले there was someone from US who basically came over. I'm not able to recollect his name. He was also from Pakistan origin. So. And they were here, as I said, they were here for a long time. I think वो क्या बोलते हैं इंडिया के अकाउंट में, and how Muslims are treated. I think likes of Rana, likes of Arfa, likes of Ravish, and the entire जो हमारी जो Indian left media, I think एक hyperbole मैं बोलूँगा कि एक इवेंट ले लिया, उसको बड़ा चढ़ा के बोल दिया, CA को ले लिया. CA था ना, NCA जो भी NRC.
अरे बाबा, फंडिंग के लिए कुछ भी करेगा, फंडिंग के लिए कुछ भी करेगा, ठीक है. All these Rana Ayubs, I know a friend of Rana Ayub, he or she is also in the same category. ये सब लोग चूतिया है ना. These guys, they will try to capitalize on any such event only to raise funding. Arvind, you and I, we have been on a trip together where we saw something right in front of our eyes, man.
Yeah, we have seen
of a similar fashion. Yes. So again, not to name names, but all this is, the Rana Ayubs of the world. These guys are basically hate mongers. They capitalize on one of these such events like these only to increase their
popularity, their own
funding. Yeah, and popularity. Yeah. Tell me one thing. If Rana Ayub is watching this, I only ask her one question, which she has already gotten from Sadanand Dhume, if I'm correct. Produce the audio files of the Gujarat files. And then I'm willing to believe you.
Yeah.
For every tweet that you put out afterwards.
Very true.
Otherwise, shut the fuck up.
Very true, Anand. And sort of, I think you hit the nail on the head. Ki hypocrisy यहाँ पे ज़्यादा है. Hindus and Muslims are living, ठीक है, problems होते हैं, are little bit more integrated than what you see in French soil today, and वो result सबको दिख रहा है. I'll give a quick perspective on US, and then we'll wrap up with what's next. What do Macron and the French government do, and we'll take our opinions there. US में barely any coverage. I saw Kushal Mehra tweeting about it, and मेरे दिमाग में भी वही था कि why is no one talking about this? I mean, I look at New York Times, it's not a front page news. They are covering very well happily, the affirmative action. Sure, important news, but they lost it. They're going to talk about Bakhmut and the Ukraine war and the whole...
It's not there on New York Times today. I checked
it's not the front page
just now.
It's not the front page news on Wall Street Journal. It is below. Like आप scroll करोगे, बीच में China का news होगा, बीच में एक line होगा कि French riots होंगे and all that. It's not covered at all by NBC. अब जाके CNN का एक coverage मैंने I think कल देखा था, but barely, if this was any other country and if this was India, this would have been like, oh my God, the world is falling, the democracies are falling apart, we are struggling, the intolerance is rising high, and then there will be those few running coverage around
beacon of democracy.
the beacon of democracy. You can see it's probably down. Yeah.
You see anything? और ये चूतिया बोलेंगे इंडिया के बारे में whether it's a good democracy or not.
Correct. And if I share my screen here, just a second.
Let me see.
I had Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, it's not the front news.
It's not a front news.
Funding नहीं आता ना बाबा.
It's the third news. It's one of the news. So if you look at the Wall Street Journal, which is also, butts into the अभी Wall Street Journal news में आया था क्योंकि the Wall Street Journal reporter questioned Modi on the human rights in front of Biden, and they trolled her. Oh, why? What's happening to the human rights in France here? Another democracy, a G7 member, but no, it's not the front page news.
Arvind, do you remember the farm laws जब आए थे, आने वाले थे, when they wanted to, तो जब
it's the front news.
It was the front news.
It was the front news. So it's not covered at all by the Western mainstream media because it is not fitting the narrative. Because here it's the minorities are doing the work of the ghastly acts of riots, and so that is not going to fit the narrative there for any of the Western mainstream media, and so coverage ही नहीं है यहाँ पे. And you can see how biased and how tunnel vision these guys are. पैसे के लिए कुछ भी करेंगे and then they'll want. The whole idea of journalism is to show the truth. Try to be as unbiased as you can, and all of these media outlets are covering it. The only piece of news, and I'll be honest here, is Twitter. Twitter is where I'm getting. I'll get both news. I'll get bad news about what's happening, but I'll also get the good news. Yeah. It's on me whether I decipher what I want, but at least the whole idea is present me all the information. I will choose what I want to hear, or I'll choose what I want to see.
I also studied or was drilled this quote called "Justice delayed is justice denied." But again, I'm facing music from an Indian court in this matter. So again, what we studied and what we are facing in life, diametrically opposite.
Absolutely.
And they completely bullshit. And this is something we should cover in the next podcast. The case pendency in Indian courts. And I have to go now. So
so I want to end this. So I know you're leaving. So what's next year? Final reaction. What should Macron do? What should French government do? How do they take it from here? कैसे रोकेंगे इसको?
So shall I go first? Then you can.
Yeah, you go ahead. I know you want to leave. So
this it's not a large scale. It's not a civil war. France is not under civil war. So this is going to be put, if not today, maybe in 3-4 days, it's going to go down, at least according to my analysis. But the underlying currents, whatever frictions exist between the ghettoized section of France and the, let's say, the white part of France, is only going to increase more. So the tensions are just going to increase. And again, now you can bring in the question of, is there a foreign hand in this? Who is fomenting all this? So there are a lot of interesting dynamics at play here. So this is going to be quelled pretty soon, but this is going to be a recurring phenomenon. Now, remember, in France, although there is a significant Muslim population, there is no figurehead. There is no mass leader. Like, in the far right, you have Marine Le Pen, you have Macron, you have other prominent leaders who represent specific parts or specific political alignments within the French society. But as far as the Muslims are concerned, there is no notable figure out there. Okay? So unless the Muslims can reorganize themselves against some representative who's charismatic and able to take their affairs into consideration, this is going to be a recurring phenomenon. Now, the reason you don't see this in Canada, for example, which has a huge pro-Khalistani population in areas like Brampton and Vancouver, you don't see them going on a riot simply because they have far greater political representation at the center and at the local levels. You saw this in the case of Trudeau, right? When Trudeau had to become prime minister, he actually needed the support of Jagmeet, or as Abhijit calls him, Hagmeet Singh, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's probably one of the reasons why these the Punjabis are not revolting against the Canadian establishment. Whereas here, one of the main reasons why the French Muslims are revolting is because they don't have anybody to look up to. Each one to his own.
Easiest way is
that's
violence.
where, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I have to leave.
Anand, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll talk again later. Bye-bye.
Take care. Pleasure. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
So sort of, you can end it with your perspective and I'll finish with mine, and then we can wrap this podcast.
Oh, we just saw the pie chart, right? It's say 8%. I think just India में थोड़े right wingers का जो opinion रहता है Muslims के बारे में, I think it's a point of no return. I think 8% population है. It's very little that Macron can do as far as, there are talks of, I think 2-3 महीने पहले मैंने कुछ न्यूज़ पढ़ा था as far as, illegal migrants को deport करेंगे, लेकिन that possibly would be, to the newest section of people who might have, come to France. लेकिन we just discussed, I think it's been boiling for decades. तो I think एक solution तो इसका यही हो सकता है कि I think that it's two ways. I think one of the solution that Anand pointed out कि कोई एक representative आए Muslims का, that's one point. I think the other solution, I think the long-term solution to to ensure there's some sort of I won't say कि totally frictionless हो जाएगा, लेकिन and this possibly goes across not only in France, क्योंकि अब तो ये problem it's there in majority of the bigger countries of Europe. It's there in UK, it's there in Sweden, it's there in Germany. I think it has to be, I think the Muslim population possibly have to do a little amount of self-introspection. And I think that possibly is going to, has to come from the mosques, because mosques are their, go-to centers as far as the generation of, certain philosophies are concerned.
Correct.
I think, ये जो Anand ने जो बात की थी कि, ghettoization और, एक area में रहते हैं, वो एक part है, लेकिन the other, how does, certain ideas generate in certain young Muslim minds? It's basically, the mosques. I think थोड़े countries में थोड़ा crackdown वगैरह हुआ है mosque में, मुझे मालूम है France वगैरह में हुआ है.
France में हुआ है. France is one of the places which they've done it a lot, but looks like not enough.
It's not enough. No, it's not enough.
It's not been enough. Here's my take, and we can end with this. I think Europe is in trouble. I think Anand's chart clearly it's in trouble. Societal trouble. It's nothing. It's deeper divisions here. This is what happens when assimilations don't happen. And I think India has seen it. Now India is also seeing a version of it. जब तक आपने Article 370 रखा है, Islam was, Kashmir was isolated. When you keep someone in isolation, it's never going to go work very well for the country, because वो आपको मतभेद आ जाए कि हम ऐसे हैं, आप ऐसे हो, हम आपके साथ नहीं हैं and all that. And Northeast के साथ भी वही हुआ जो आज, for unfortunate reasons is happening even today there, because of all of the isolation which the region has had for decades. और ये जो आपने ghettoization हुआ है, और एक वो fundamental belief जो है यहाँ पे, the mosques itself, it's the youngest religion in the world. People don't understand. It's also one of the rigid religions in the world. So when you are young, you have to take care of, you have to guide them, you have to take care of them. And unfortunately, the isolation and this ghettoization is not the solution. I think France government, not just France government, I think the European Union in general has failed at their immigration integration. Despite having language doesn't mean anything. You have to integrate them properly. Jobs, economy, all of them are interconnected. Mobility नहीं दोगे तो वो isolation में ही रहेंगे and all that. And I think the immigration is going to get hard cracked down. I see a rise of far right. Unfortunately, we don't want any extremes in politics. We don't want far left in general. We don't want far right because it can go extreme. Always having that moderate view helps the nation, because you're not antagonizing any one particular society. But unfortunately, ये जो हम देख रहे हैं, so Sweden में आपने देखा far right won. Hungary में far right has been on the another place thing. Italy just was one the right wing. I'm predicting a right wing again. Macron is under trouble. I think he will try to quell this. He's under trouble. It's the perception जो image आ गया. It's that. And मुझे लगता है कि France will start a crackdown, harder crackdown on their immigrant population. Not gonna end well because उनको लगेगा ये हम पे और अत्याचार कर रहे हैं. You know that, it's that scenario. Where do you stop it? And we need to draw the line. The refugee crisis hasn't helped Europe at all, and this is all gonna spark more than France. So सुनने में आ रहा है बेल्जियम में हो रहा है. अनंत ने भी बताया है. Belgium is a very similar version of France, the same ghettoization जो उन्होंने ब्रसेल्स में देखा है. And if that's happening, it's not going to end well. And I think the whole left liberal concept of bringing immigrants, society, and making all of it diversity together, it's a great idea in concept. I truly believe in that. But you got to give economic opportunities. You got to give the assimilation. और अगर वो आप नहीं करवा रहे हो और आप नाम के लिए आप बोल रहे हो कि इंटीग्रेशन हो रहा है, I think it's not going to work. And आपने सही बोला. I think the radical Muslims just have to introspect here, seek help of mosque and see what can be done here, because unfortunately it's them who are in the news. I mean, not all other immigrants are getting in the news. I mean, I'm not seeing Jews going out and burning this thing, or Hindus, or Christians or other other religions. Yeah, I mean, I hope the protests die down or this solution out quickly. But there's going to be a pain before eventual solution emerges. Maybe a political solution, maybe a societal solution. I think it's going to take some more time. But deeper days, dark days for France. West, we all need to learn from this and see how the society cannot get fractured.
Absolutely.
With that, we end our first podcast. So thank you very, very much for tuning in. हम सीख रहे हैं. It's 3 people for doing it for the first time, with 3 different diverse opinions, and living in 3 different diverse countries in that manner. Yeah, looking forward to doing this more. I think the Kairos moment is here. I think we would like to continue more, and I think we have a few more other topics we want to talk about next time. But I think with that, we'll end this today. So thank you for watching. Please hit that like button. Please subscribe. Learning here first time. Give us some love. अगर हमने कुछ गलतियां बोल दी, share it in the comments. We will obviously course correct. We'll obviously, we're not perfect, but we're always ready to learn. Yeah, that's really the spirit. And yeah, call it as we see here, without creating any offense, but trying to give that balance to you. And that's our job. We're trying to do what mainstream media is not trying to do. So we should be doing. Thank you again. We will talk again later.
Yeah. Bye-bye.